The spotlight is on the state capitol as federal investigators swoop down. We talk about it next on Capitol View. Welcome to Capitol View, the weekly program on state government and politics and how it might just affect you. Joining us this week on Capitol View is Peter Hancock of Capitol News, Illinois. Welcome, Mr. Hancock.
Thank you.
As well as Kent Redfield, Professor Emeritus of Political Science from the University of Illinois, Springfield.
Good to be here.
Well, first let's start with the good news. After being dark for several years, spotlights have been turned on again outside the state capitol building. This happened just this week, and for those who haven't seen it, go Google it right away, look it up. It's gorgeous. It looks like a shiny city on the hill, but perhaps things aren't really so bright inside. And that's what the feds appear to be looking at in recent weeks as state senators come under suspicion. The governor, J.B. Pritzker, has spoken out about it, and search warrants have been issued. A lawsuit has been filed. What a mess, or apparent mess, we appear to be looking at this point in time. I guess if you were flip about it, if this looks like the sort of net that they used in Alaska to catch 20 tons of fish at a time. I mean, they've been to the federal investigators. They've served search warrants at several places up around Chicago that have connections with State Senator Marty Sandoval, who is the chairman of the State Senate Transportation Committee, who played a role in formation of the $45 billion state capital bill, for which we are paying with heightened gas taxes and perhaps other heightened taxes as we go down the road. Peter, how serious is this, do you think?
Well, I have to tell you, when the federal agents came in last week, I felt like I was finally really, initiated or hazed into Illinois state government.
Correct.
It was my very first FBI raid on a sitting state senator's office.
Well, congratulations.
And I remember when all kinds of reporters, we were hanging out in the little entryway into this suite of offices. You could see federal agents, people in the background.
Sure.
And then we started realizing, well, gosh, there are several ways to get out of there. Maybe they won't come through this door. And so some of us were like starting to walk around to stake out the other doors. And out they came right past the TV cameras, right out the north door of the State House, and then stood there with boxes, a brown paper bag that says evidence across it.
Kind of like a document perp walk.
Yeah. Okay. And stood there and allowed themselves to be photographed while they're waiting for two SUVs to come up. But you ask about how serious this is, and it's about the $45 billion capital plan.
Sure.
I mean, the taxpayers are kicking up a lot of money here. Governor Pritzker, this was his campaign promise, and he was very proud about getting this through the General Assembly. And now comes these apparent allegations. From all appearances, it looks like they're investigating whether or not there's bribery or kickbacks involved in steering contracts to certain companies. And that is a very big deal, especially when taxpayers are forking over this kind of money.
Sure. No indictments issued at this point in time.
At this point in time, he has not been charged with any wrongdoing.
Yeah. Professor Redfield, is there a sort of gentleman's, so to speak, agreement on indictments and sitting legislators? And do they get to keep doing what they're doing unless and until they're charged or convicted?
Well, there is a history of this, as you not surprisingly enough, with Illinois, and it really, the bar has kind of been not currently under indictment, and so once someone is indicted, then the normal pattern has been to remove them from a position of authority, and this happened with a labor leader that was under indictment and headed up the labor committee when I was working for the legislature in the mid '70s, and
sounds like something. Go ahead.
Yeah, we had, but we also had a number of legislators who were continuing to serve and make decisions, vote on the State House floor while our trial was going on in Chicago for in a shakedown kind of situation, and so it's it isn't you do have these as an elected official, then you haven't been removed from office. You can still do your duties, but it really is about appearances. And I think Senator Collerton has probably, or Senate President Collerton, set a bad example by when his cousin was indicted. He removed him from the head of a powerful committee, but but gave him another committee, and that's probably, just from appearances' sake, putting someone on the sideline while they're under indictment, even though indictment is not conviction, then. But this is about appearances. The governor is certainly scrambling because everything that, there's a tremendous amount of money. We're going to spend lots of money in the Capitol. Most of this is desperately needed, but all of these projects come under scrutiny. The more rocks you overturn, the more this feeds into the narrative of the people that are fighting the graduate income tax, who say, you can't trust these people to give them more money. And so the governor is in a very bad situation, and he publicly called for Collerton to remove Sandoval from chairing of that committee, and at this point Collerton is not willing to do that.
He asked him, he brought this out publicly, Governor Pritzker did, after talking to Senator President John Collerton and telling him much the same thing. Look, you got to sideline this guy, at least to some extent, while this is pending, because there's a greater good presumably here to be served, which is to preserve, the Capitol bill, and perhaps, as you alluded to lay the groundwork for a successful progressive income tax vote a couple of years down the line, or perhaps as early as next year. And John Collerton, the Senate President, has said apparently no. I guess we should add, I think we've also all know, as you've mentioned, a cousin, I think the third cousin of the Senate President, has been indicted and was chair of the Labor Committee, and now has been removed from that, or he's still there. And when the Senate President was asked about that, I read about him saying he's still a valued member of the caucus. Is that an appropriate response?
Well, again, indictment is not conviction. So at one level, certainly, innocent until proven guilty. But politics is about perception, and it's about building public trust. And this just is one more add-on. We've got all the alderman in Chicago, Burke, under indictment, and all of the public raiding of offices by the FBI. You pile this on top, now we've got two. By the end of the summer, by the first of the year, we could have two sitting members of the state Senate under indictment for public corruption. This is not a good picture. It reinforces the narrative that everybody has about, they're all crooked and it's all fixed.
Is anybody else struck by the fact that this happens often enough in Illinois that there's a protocol for it?
Well, you're not in Kansas anymore, Peter.
Well, it just, it happens so frequently that, okay, if you're indicted, we take you off the committee, but if you're just the target of search warrants, we're going to sit back and wait and see.
That's a good idea. Perhaps it should be added to the formal rules of the legislature for a procedure when and if somebody is indicted, because you're right, it does happen often enough.
And I think it points to a political culture in Illinois where certain kinds of behavior have been tolerated, and where people view serving in the General Assembly or serving in public office as a career rather than as a form of public service.
Yeah. And that's part and parcel with it pays a living wage, even if you aren't crooked. I mean, you can actually earn your living being a statesman, a legislator, and you don't have to break the law if you don't want to. But it's something that's worth fighting for. And I think now you can correct me if I'm wrong, Professor Redfield, but some time ago the balance of shifted so that most of the folks who are in the state legislature now are full-time legislators, as opposed to I'm also a lawyer, I'm also a farmer, I also sell insurance.
Yeah, the business of state government is incredibly complex, and it really is a full-time job if you're going to adequately represent your constituents and also try to shape public policy. And so that does create, that we've had a flap at the end of the session about automatic pay raises for legislators, and so it's if you're setting your own salary, which the legislature does, that always creates problems of perception. And But it, again, we just came off of putting a whole bunch of success governors in jail, and now we have a short period of kind of we're going to be much more professional, and we talk about ethics legislation, and we pass all kinds of things, and then it just seems inevitably that we're back to get back to square one.
Let's go back for a second to the investigation, what we know of it. As we know, they did serve a search warrant at the Capitol building, but they also served search warrants at a number of different places. I think Lyons City Hall might have been one of them. I'm not familiar frankly with some of these smaller towns around Chicago that have some connection to Senator Sandoval. So I'm not quite sure. How many search warrants are we up to at this point in time? At least 3, I think.
And there was also his district office in
Correct.
Cicero, as well as his home and a couple of municipalities.
Yeah.
Outside of the legislature, according to his statement of economic interests, Senator Sandoval has a company called Puentes Inc., which apparently does English to Spanish translation services, and some of his clients include municipalities. Right now, the town of Cicero, according to his 2018 statement, it was the town of Cicero and a park district in the area. And the town puts out a monthly newsletter or whatever to the people there, and he has a service where he translates it to Spanish for the Spanish-speaking people.
Inevitably you get into situations where people in power have opportunities to leverage that power and to get private gain out of it. And if you have a Rod Blagojevich kind of everything's for sale, everything has a price kind of approach to politics, then there's only so much you can do to limit behavior, and you get until the feds come knocking at the door. And we see, we're playing this out at the federal level. We've got all kinds of things, allegations and complaints about the President of the United States leveraging official actions to benefit himself financially. Now we're talking about the former vice president and his son, and whether there were things done, using your official power to leverage financial advantage. And so, this is probably as old as politics. But Illinois does have both a well-deserved reputation and often quite a problem with keeping these kinds of behaviors under control and minimizing them.
Sure. One thing that was released recently, sort of released this week, in response to a FOIA request, or I don't think it was just from WBEZ Radio in Chicago, but it was a copy of the search warrant that was served in legislative offices in Springfield, as well as a list. It's called an inventory of what they took. And some very tantalizing sorts of things, there were potentially tantalizing things, were redacted from this by the office of the Senate President, John Cullerton. Such things as IDOT, Illinois Department of Transportation Employee A, or something like that. They also, by the way, redacted the serial numbers of computers, which I don't think most people are much interested in. But there is enough stuff there where you're thinking, gee, why can't we know that? And so WBEZ Radio has in fact now sued the Senate president here, demanding that these documents be produced, because they're not the creature. They weren't created by the Senate office. They were created by federal prosecutors and handed to the Senate. And so the argument is you can't redact something that is just kind of a pass-through. How much hope might there be in A, finding out anything substantive through this lawsuit? B, by the time that it works its way through the court, is it going to be moot?
Well, probably very little. I got copies of the same heavily redacted search warrant and the inventory list of items seized. And they cite very specifically a number of court cases as well as specific statutes. You can't compel the release of law enforcement information that would identify confidential sources, or if it would impede an ongoing investigation. things like that.
But let me interrupt for a second if I could. The law also specifically says that the only entity, the only agency that can claim the exemption on this would impede an investigation is the law enforcement agency that's in charge of the investigation. The Senate President's office is clearly not in charge of this investigation.
I have no evidence to suggest who it was that did the redaction.
Right.
So, good luck with the lawsuit.
Yeah.
You're not going to get that.
Normally, the federal government is going to be very careful about putting out information that would tend to either provide additional information for people they want to talk to or give people a heads up.
It's hard to imagine the FBI giving any legislator in Illinois secret stuff and saying, please don't tell anybody. Go ahead.
Yeah, and so I don't know that you're going to get a lot of information just because of the length of time, but the bigger picture is that they certainly have committed a lot of resources to a case that they think they can build, that a member of the state Senate has been using his official position to leverage financial gain, to have use that power to shape contracts, a whole bunch of different things. Using government for private gain is the one thing that the public just goes insane, and rightly so about. That this is our money, this is public power, and we are people are the people on the inside are the ones that are getting are getting the deals, and the little guy gets left out. And so this is it's corrosive at just a number of different levels, and so it's very unfortunate that having gone through Bryan and Blagojevich, and now we're back with, now we're doing the city council in Chicago, now we're doing the state senate, and this is pretty disheartening in terms of, if you think that you ought to be able to get government and public service that is clean and is in the public interest.
I guess one thing that captured my attention, rightly or wrongly, is traditionally, so to speak, the spotlight of the crooked, the bad person in the legislature isn't on the Senate side. It's that awful person, Mike Madigan, who's one of the most unpopular politicians in the state of Illinois. He and Rauner had a 4-year contest to see who polled worse. With this stuff coming up, could some of that unwelcome spotlight now go over to Cullerton's office? Certainly what the governor said yesterday, hey, I talked to Cullerton, and now I'm saying it publicly, Sandoval needs to be go someplace else from his committee chairmanship. He's also on the Senate's leadership staff. Could this spill over into Cullerton, at least, in some of the same ways that Madigan has built up a certain negative reputation in some corners?
I think it really depends on how the voters respond to this. I mean, I was really struck by the fact that when Alderman Ed Burke was indicted in January of this year, he got reelected.
Sure.
So apparently the people in his district are not that concerned about it. The question now is, are the people in Martin Sandoval's district concerned about this, and the people in John Cullerton's district? I haven't seen a whole lot of indication yet that voters in Illinois, at least at the state level, are really willing to punish their elected representatives over this kind of behavior.
Yeah, okay. Let's move on for a second and to stuff a bit less icky perhaps, and let's talk about gambling for a second. There's been a new Danville Casino that's been proposed. I've seen the drawing of it. Boy, it really looks nice and posh. I can't wait to go and play some blackjack. Am I going to get the chance anytime soon, do you think?
Oh, I think yes. There is going to be a huge push to get these up and running once they've got the licenses and get things clear, because of the competition involved. And so they want to, they want to firm up markets. They want to move as quickly as possible. Now, that having been said, this is, you can have local problems, you can have state problems, you can have gambling commission, regulatory kinds of problems, all of those things. there's certainly, and then you actually have to have people come and play. It's not whether you're going to be there, it's whether you're going to have anybody else with you that becomes the big question as far as Danville is concerned. And Rockford, again, there are a lot of, this is like spring baseball where, a lot of high hopes and we're going to, we've got the team and we're going to go out there and sometimes that doesn't work out. But Illinois is going to be, there was a recent article in a sports gambling magazine about Illinois being kind of becoming certainly the Midwest gambling capital.
Sure.
And so we're going to do it all. We're talking today about whether the major league. Major franchise, sports, baseball, football, what kind of control, they're saying, well, we'd like to have some special advantages on sports books and stuff in terms of our competition if we're taking bets at Wrigley Field or Soldier Field or what have you and stuff. So, boy, there are a lot of moving pieces in terms of getting this in place.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's, I hate to keep coming back to the legislature, but one of the principals, well, we're not sure exactly what role he is playing, but at least linked to the ownership group of the would-be or hopefully might be Danville Casino that's has been authorized, is none other than Lou Lang, former state representative, formerly in the inner circle of Michael Madigan. That has a certain, I'm not sure that folks are as happy with that as they might be. Is this just happens? Is this a who cares sort of thing, or should folks be concerned that a former powerful legislator who pushed through gaming during his career in the legislature is now aligned with a casino ownership group?
A matter of concern, possibly surprising. I don't think so. I think in that kind of a position, you build up relationships with the industry that you're trying to promote. And when you're out of the legislature, you go back to that industry and say, I worked for you. Maybe you can do me a good solid here. So I'm not aware of any ethics laws that prohibit it. And I'm not sure that Mr. Lang still has that many connections with the current gaming board that he's going to get any special consideration for that. But I know Danville definitely wants that casino. I think out of concern that there's going to be another one just across the Indiana state line sometime soon. So I don't know. I'm not. It looks weird, but I'm not sure. Why is it weird? Why is it? Is it wrong? And if so, what's the law that says it's wrong?
And you're right; it's not unprecedented. His name is escaping me as I sit here, so I apologize for that. But it was a person who was in charge of marijuana policy under Governor Bruce Rauner. Now has moved to the private sector in some way, form, or fashion, is my understanding. And he once was in charge of helping regulate marijuana under the medical marijuana program. Now he's involved in the marijuana industry from the private side. So it's not unprecedented.
There are revolving door provisions in terms of not going to work for entities that you've been regulating and those sorts of things. And those are things you can always take a look at. But there are an awful lot of former members of the General Assembly that are representing clients in front of the legislature. That is certainly nothing new, and it can be both more lucrative and a lot easier on your health to be a lobbyist than a legislator. So it's not too surprising.
Sure, and I don't know if this is related or not, but Tim Mapes, who was the former chief of staff for Michael Madigan, this week was in the news again for getting caught up in a sexual harassment matter. No real new news out there, with the exception of the Inspector General, I think this week reported that he should not be allowed to work again for state government. That would have been unlikely anyway, but my understanding he's a lobbyist at this point in time, so he still is... he has knowledge and he has experience, and he's not a pariah, I don't think. Am I right or not?
He's not going to have much of a public presence because of what happened, and that coming out reminds us that the speaker has had some problems too.
Yeah.
And I think that the speaker probably hopes that is now behind him,
Right.
that legislation has been passed to deal with workplace and sexual harassment in relation to the legislature. And so there certainly is, a hope that that story is behind us.
Yeah.
And so I think, the Speaker's office is probably more than happy to take a break from the from the spotlight and let it shine on the Senate President for a while.
We got less than a minute left, so shifting quickly in one last question here. Rodney Davis, he has come out with full-throated support of Donald Trump here, given even during recent events. Had a close election last time against Betsy Dirksen-Londrigan, who's running against him again. Good move or bad move to be so supportive of the president at this point in time? What do you think, Professor?
Oh, I think that it's terribly risky because of the ups and downs. You don't know, having gone through Watergate and the Clinton impeachment, you don't know how these things are going to turn out. But clearly, he needs to jump one way or the other. If you kind of go in between, like Adam Kinzinger, the Republican congressman from the South suburbs, he's gotten in hot water for just saying with the Trump people, just for saying a couple of mild things. So you really are in between. And so this could work out to be a plus, but there were an awful lot of people, Nixon backers, who went down with the ship in Watergate.
Okay, and with that, we're out of time. So thanks for joining us, and we'll see you again next week on Capitol View.